Mark the date, mark the time, write it down, because this is a very, very rare occasion that you're about to see. I actually agree with Ben Shapiro on an issue. I think this breakdown he's about to give is pretty much completely correct. I don't know if there's anything that I would really change about the commentary here to make it more accurate. So he's going to talk about why he thinks Ron DeSantis, his preferred candidate, by the way, is struggling. He's going to explain, hey, here's why I think he's not doing as well and why Trump is outperforming him by quite a bit. And even Vivek is now surging as well around him. Although I do think DeSantis had a good debate night the other night, and the polling shows he was one of the winners, if not the biggest winner. I think you could argue maybe Nikki Haley was in the conversation. Vivek was a little polarizing, where a lot of people thought he won, but then a lot of people thought he didn't. He lost ground in some polls, gained ground in other polls. Anyway, I digress. But Ben is going to talk about, hey, this is why DeSantis is struggling. And, I mean, I think he pretty much nails it. Let's listen.
All right, folks, so Ron DeSantis' campaign has failed to catch fire. It's not collapsed completely. He's still in second place, but he isn't really gaining on President Trump. There have been several systemic struggles for the DeSantis campaign. I think they made several core assumptions when they jumped into the race, and none of those have come true. So, core assumption number one, governance matters. Nope. Not one iota. Not in the Republican primaries, it don't. And the simple fact of the matter is that Ron DeSantis passing a bill to stop critical race theory in the state of Florida has been treated by Republican primary voters the same as Vivek Ramaswamy saying things about critical race theory.
This is an undeniably correct point. He's like, hey, DeSantis is pointing to his ultra-conservative record of governance and saying, I've proven myself. Look, I thought you guys are conservative. Here's conservative governance. And their Republican base is like, don't care. Not even in the slightest. So in other words, the way I would phrase this is, the Republican primary has become much more about vibes than it is about any semblance of policy whatsoever. They care about the show, and Trump is the show. They care about triggering the libs, and Trump is the master of triggering the libs. So Ron DeSantis can't out-showman Donald Trump, and he can't trigger the libs worse than Donald Trump. And so effectively, that's why he's still the leader. And it's really interesting. Ben, I want you to reflect on that a little further. What does it say about the Republican base that they don't care at all about policy? Not in the slightest. What does that say? Because Shapiro, for all of his flaws, and he has many, he is a conservative ideologue. He is deeply conservative in terms of the policies he prefers. Now he's learning, hey, I thought that this base agreed with me ideologically. They don't care about ideology at all. We covered the poll the other day. People in the Republican base are more likely to believe Trump over anybody else in their life. Their wife, their husband, their kids, their parents, religious leaders, and like literally anybody. Trump comes above them. It is deeply, deeply cultish at this point. And here's Ben Shapiro having a realization like, well, I guess governance and policy doesn't matter to these people. Maybe that'll be worthy of some harsh critique. Even if I don't agree with a conservative ideologue, at least they stand for something. They believe in something. They have some sort of ideology. They're not just totally vibes-based and falling in line for their strong man daddy, which is what's happening with Donald Trump. All right, let's listen. He gives us some more analysis.
Saying things and doing things in a Republican primary, there is no actual distinction. And this is hard for a lot of people who are in politics to understand, but it is the reality. Because I get it, politicians make promises all the time. And so you tend to believe those promises in a primary if you have no reason not to believe the promises in a primary, which is why Donald Trump could make promises in 2016 on all sides of a particular issue. And people are like, okay, well, I either trust the guy or I don't trust the guy. DeSantis is like, you should trust me because I did these things in Florida. And the Republican voters are like, well, but I could trust Vivek. Maybe he'll do those things when he's sure. I have no reason to believe he won't do those things. So doing things and saying things in a Republican primary turned out to be almost the exact same thing. So DeSantis has focused a lot on governance in Florida, but the governance that he's focused on in the campaign has been all the same stuff that Vivek just says. And so he hasn't actually won any advantage over somebody like Vivek by passing a law banning critical race theory in the classroom over Vivek saying he would do that if you were president of the United States. Right, so that distinction, which I think DeSantis thought was going to be very telling for him, hasn't had any impact on the race. Second, as I mentioned, the electability argument for DeSantis was rooted in the idea that Trump would probably pull low and DeSantis would pull better against Biden. And that hasn't happened, largely because everyone pulls well against Biden, or at least half decently against Biden, because Biden's a really crappy president, as we'll get to in just a little while. So that's hurt him. And then on top of that, I think that DeSantis truly believed that because he had some capital in the bank, not just money, but like actual political capital in the bank, that he could then not go into unfriendly areas and reiterate to the American public why he was popular in the first place. So Ron DeSantis is not just popular because of his COVID policy. Ron DeSantis was popular in the state of Florida because the media made him enemy number one, and then he went into their spaces and he wrecked them. DeSantis, as I've said over and over, needs to be doing this. I don't understand for the life of me why he has not thus far. He's basically shielded himself from opposing media. I get it on a personal level. It's not fun to do that sort of stuff, but you know who does opposing media fairly frequently is Vivek. You know who does opposing media fairly frequently or at least did during the 2016, he doesn't do it now, but during 2016, Donald Trump did opposing media fairly frequently. If you want to show the Republican base that you are a fighter, DeSantis thinks you do that by actually doing things as governor. As I mentioned, nope. The only way people think that you're a fighter in the Republican base right now is you go on media and you go to a member of the media and you wreck them to their face. That is the way that you show them that you are a fighter. DeSantis has not done this in that campaign so far. So he's not really dropped in the polls. He's stuck still in that 15 to 18% range, but he's not bust out.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I said if I was in charge of helping Ron DeSantis, that's exactly what I would tell him. Is like, one of the reasons you got popular with the Republican base is that there was a bunch of video clips of him in these press conferences sparring with the media, yelling at the media, calling them liars, calling them frauds, saying they're not giving the whole truth, etc. Now, in those fights, I almost 100% of the time align with the media and think Ron DeSantis is a little virtue signaling prick who's wrong about almost everything when it comes to policy. But that is undeniably one of the things that made him very popular among the Republican base. Now that he's running for president, he is refusing to do any hostile interviews. Well, if you want your poll numbers to go up, go take an interview with CNN and yell at Jake Tapper. Go on MSNBC and piss off Rachel Maddow. Go on Morning Joe and explain to them why they're assholes and liars and now resistance liberals when Joe Scarborough is a registered Republican. Like, just go do something that's going to generate attention. If the Republican primary is just about the show, which we've already established it is, you have to give people a show. Now, it might be that you're between a rock and a hard place because you're never going to out-showman Trump. That's probably true. But at least you give yourself a fighting chance if you go into hostile territory and you make a big deal out of it. And look, guys, these are media jackals on the right. When it comes to like right-wing Twitter, he doesn't even have to do a good job in order for them to clip it out and act like Ron DeSantis pwns Joe Scarborough, bro. He could do like a mediocre job and they'll pretend like he did an awesome job. So why would you not do that? Shapiro's 100% correct here. The only thing I would add to what he says is, look, another big issue is that DeSantis is just not all that charismatic. Now, it's interesting. There was an article about this recently. The conclusion of it is, yeah, DeSantis is an introvert, and introverts like see themselves in him. But the thing that would, make it not creepy, because he's viewed as kind of creepy right now, is if you're self-aware about your awkwardness and your introversion and the fact that you're not really, that good interpersonally. Remember that video where he's like, hey, nice to meet you. What's your name? And the guy says, Tim. And he goes, okay. And then he walks away. It's okay to be like that as long as you're aware that you're like that. So in other words, you can't be under any sort of delusion that like, actually, I'm good with people and I'm good in crowds and I'm charismatic. And no, you have to be like, yeah, I'm kind of awkward. Yeah, I'm kind of an introvert. Hey, my bad. My bad if I come across a little bit so. Like, if you're self-aware about it, then you can kind of get away with it. But he's not self-aware about it. And then, look, I wouldn't say he's Jeb Bush tier. He's not that awkward. But he's certainly more awkward than a lot of the other candidates. He's not as naturally charismatic or good interpersonally. And so the other thing I would add to what Shapiro was saying here is that over time, that tended to come out more. The awkwardness tended to come out more. And like lack of charisma, although it shouldn't really be something that we care about in a leader, a presidential candidate, or any politician, charisma like really is not relevant at all. But people do care about it. They do. And it sucks. I mean, there's a lot of used car salesmen out there who are ripping people off who are phenomenally charismatic. Charisma people use as like a stand-in for competence. But it's not actually that. It just appears like that. It's the appearance of competence without actually necessarily having it. Not having it politically, unfortunately, is a big strike against you. And in this case with DeSantis, it's really, really hurting him. So I would agree with the points he made. And I would also add that the lack of charisma is coming back to bite him. I don't know. We'll see what happens going forward. But like I said, mark the date, mark the time. This is the first and probably the last time you will ever see Kyle Kulinski of Secular Talk agreeing with Ben Shapiro. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.